I'm Nicola Talent, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. So I watched the first of the Gilligan trilogy.
Yeah. Were you impressed? Like, did it work as a piece of television for a start? And how do you feel that like the one of the great interviews I always remember was Louis Theroux and Jimmy Savile. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Oh, yes.
Now,
fabulous piece of television.
Like, although Jimmy Savile didn't admit any crimes or whatever way, and he could, obviously you can't, beat a confession out of somebody as an interviewer. But he managed to get under his skin and reveal something about his personality that, it was...
That we didn't know.
That we didn't know, and you got some sort of insight into it.
Yeah.
Do you think this did the same for John Gilligan?
No, not at all. And I think I came away from what I watched exactly the way I've come away from every kind of interaction. I've met John Gilligan a few times. I've spoken to him. I've seen him interviewed before. You know those kind of sound bites you might get on the steps of a courtroom from when he's in the humour to be smart old. He's exactly the same. You get no insight, and to me, there's just nothing genuine about him. I mean, look, we would deal with people all the time, sometimes who would be on the wrong side of the law. You find yourself in communication and in conversation, sometimes having a cup of coffee with somebody that certainly wouldn't be your go-to person, or you wouldn't expect yourself to be in a position of communicating with them. But a lot of them are likeable, and there is a lot to people, mostly.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, John Gilligan, and certainly the John Gilligan we see on this documentary, I got absolutely no insight to him other than he is what he is, because I just think he's a sociopathic little thug.
Yeah.
And I'm not using that term lightly. He's sneering. It's coming across as if he has it all rehearsed what he wants to say. He's talking about former colleagues of his in the crime underworld, all of whom are dead, and I suppose aren't here to defend themselves of what he's saying.
Or dead, or in the witness protection program, I think. I mean, I suppose the basics of it, it's a 3-part documentary gone out on Virgin Media.
Called The Confessions of John Gilligan, is it?
Confessions
of a Crime Boss.
Confessions of a Crime Boss.
Yeah. If that title doesn't work with what you see.
Yeah.
Because that to me would spell that you're kind of having an intimate portrait of a crime boss.
Yeah.
Of John Gilligan in this case. That you'd maybe be moving about with him in his day-to-day life, that you'd have a sort of a probing journalist there trying to peel back the layers of this individual. Certainly not the first episode, and I know this is over 3 episodes, and I know this is a culmination of hours and hours of interviews with him, but certainly what we're getting as a viewer is a sit-down interview and sound bites from him about certain things. He talks about Veronica Guerin in it. Look, I'll tell you this much. I should have been glued to that.
Yeah.
I should have been absolutely glued to it. I got the preview of it. I turned it on, and there is a new puppy in the house.
Right, okay.
I have to be honest with you. There is a new puppy in the house, so it's quite distracting.
Right.
And you have this little creature at your feet all the time, sometimes coming up doing his kind of Conor McGregor struts for that again, just like looking to be picked up and stuff. So it's a little bit distracting. But nonetheless, I would be able to multitask enough to look after the puppy and watch something on the... In fact, I was dug into something on the actual TV before I turned this on. I wasn't dug into it. I wasn't glued to it. I would fast forward bits of it.
Yeah.
It's 45, maybe 50 minutes long or something like that. I certainly glossed over bits of it. It starts with Gilligan being asked about his sort of childhood.
Yeah.
Which should interest us.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
If you think of other crime bosses out there, and they have a lot of interesting things to say about their childhood, and you begin to, I think, mostly when you start talking to a person and you're trying to understand what makes them tick, you can sometimes start to understand that when you hear.
Yeah, and you can see what shaped them and how that life, how they entered into that life, and certainly probably understand at least that bit from their perspective, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, John Gilligan, like he has spoken quite a lot to the media over the years. I mean, it's not the first time he's ever done an interview. We've obviously had people like Christy Kinnan, who's never said a word to the media one way or another beyond go away or something less polite. He said nothing over the years. John Gilligan has, on the times when he's been let out of prison, he's done an interview with Jason O'Toole before.
Yeah.
So he has spoken about...
Jason O'Toole, by the way, is the journalist sort of behind this. He's the journalist who has spoken to, I think, Gilligan in Spain over the course of how many hours, and he's written a book, and there's extracts of his interviews in The Star and The Mirror.
Yeah.
And then the documentaries going on Virgin.
Yeah, so he has spoken before. Obviously, some of the things he's saying now, as far as I remember, he's completely denied previously in interviews, which kind of goes to the credibility of it. Look, I'm not saying, you know, we as a media organisation, we wouldn't suggest that criminals can never talk, would we?
They can never talk.
Yeah, we should never carried or anything
I think
of
if
the sort.
there is everything we do,
yeah.
I do think that, and certainly a bigger project like this would be, I think if there is a reason, if there is something that, if there's a reason for it, that you're going to maybe learn something from it, that you're going to maybe gain an understanding that you wouldn't before have gained. And that can be to do with social history.
Yeah.
If you're placing this person, as I said to you, Gilligan starts off talking about his childhood. And there's a little bit of detail around that about the social history of, you know, the Dublin tenement dwellers moving out to the suburbs and places like Ballyfermot and what happened there. And there's other contributors. But, people are entitled to talk.
Yeah.
And I think people who...
And the media are entitled to carry it. Like
100%.
I mean, so Virgin Media or the newspapers today, I mean, they're absolutely entitled to carry it.
John Gilligan is currently facing charges. John Gilligan hasn't cast aside his involvement in criminality.
No. I mean, like, for example, you've interviewed, say, people who are involved in the IRA, for example. And they're speaking about some events that happened a couple of decades previously, and they are not involved in any of that kind of subversive activity anymore. And that does feel different. I mean, you see a lot of the English criminals, actually. I don't know if you watch them on TikTok sometimes, you know, from the craze era, or the guys, the mafia guys in the US. They're doing interviews, but they're doing interviews as former criminals. Yeah. Is it a bit different with John Gilligan, considering he couldn't really be considered a former criminal, could he?
Well, no, he can't. But also, like, but does that in itself and only make it that, you know, because Christy Kinnan isn't a former criminal, but if he called up now and said, do an interview with you, we'd go do it.
Yeah, you would do it.
Of course you would. So that, it is one element of it, that he is still facing charges. So he hasn't put his criminality behind him. For me, it's more, we're jumping a little bit, but I suppose to go back to the actual, what I have seen, there's something about Gilligan that you just know there's not an honest bone in his body. Yeah. There's not a decent bone in his body. He is sneering. He is smart ass. Yeah. He is having a laugh with himself and with his own sense of humour, with everything he says and everything he publicly says. That's what I've always felt about him. Yeah. That he's getting at somebody, or he has an agenda to say something about. For example, John Traynor gets quite an airing in this. Yeah. Somebody who I did try to talk to in the UK, in Margate, where he was living before he died. Traynor wasn't one for giving an interview. But with Gilligan, I think to get to know somebody, no matter who they are, you need that little bit of honesty. And you talked about the Theroux interview with Jimmy Savile. That honesty came from the fact that Theroux was kind of hanging around, and his style of journalism worked with Savile.
Yeah.
That style of journalism might not work with somebody else, but he was sort of like hanging around in the background. He does a brilliant job of sort of being a bit dumb, you know.
Yeah, but and also catching Jimmy Savile unaware,
Yes,
really.
yeah.
So it was
allowing him to behave normal, which was totally abnormal to the
exactly,
rest of us.
Exactly, not to sort of sit down and give scripted answers. But Jimmy Savile, of course, did so many interviews over the years and became really adept at knowing what to say and how to get a reaction on a talk show or whatever.
Yeah.
So Louis Theroux, despite, they did ask him hard questions about, sex offences and stuff like that, but it was really the more subtle stuff about his that he managed to reveal his personality, reveal Savile's personality.
And in a way, like his style
Yeah.
of that television show probably really suits somebody who's dishonest,
Yeah.
because you're hanging around with them long enough. It's like somebody goes into the witness box.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's no hiding.
There's no hiding.
Yeah.
So, but this style of program that has been made is, in a way, I can see what Virgin have done. They have tried not to give Gilligan a platform where he's not challenged. So
Yeah.
what they've done is they've brought in all these other contributors to try and set the scene around everything he says.
Yeah.
That totally distracts from what he has to say in actual fact, because it's coming across in sound bites. Like, for example, he starts talking about, his young life. He talks about going to Ballyfermot. He was from a large family. His father was a violent man, he describes him as, and that Gilligan says they were poor and that he had to go out and rob. He talks about getting a job on the boats, and then when he'd do bigger robberies, somebody basically came along and said to him, "Do you want to do a bank?" And he said, "Yeah, okay, how much will I get?" "You'll get 3 grand or whatever." "Right, I'll do it." And he does this bank robbery, and then he goes off on the ships, and he can't appear for his court cases because he's on the ships, and then it gets put off, and he's quite open about that stuff because it's showing how he's worked the system, which he obviously has continued to do throughout his life. Something he's really proud of.
Yeah.
How he has he's been clever enough to beat the system. So he talks about that. But you're not having that sort of fly on the wall situation with him. And in order to set the scene around that, Virgin Media have all these other voices coming in describing how much robbery was actually going on at the time, what sort of money was being made, how it was clogging up the courts, where these criminals were coming from, their backgrounds. In a way, maybe that's what makes it not work for me, or something like that. I think giving him a platform, they're going to get criticised by that, and you're going to tell me what Jimmy Guerin had to say. But he has got a platform, whether it's wrapped in bubble wrap with other voices negating what he's saying or qualifying it. He has still been given a platform, and maybe somebody should have had the courage to just go for it. Give him the platform for an hour and do it in a way that we come out of it knowing a little bit about the man. Yeah,
I mean, you're kind of onto a loser, really, with stuff like this. The winning part of it for Virgin Media and for other media organisations, for example, when RT interviewed Jerry Hutch, the winning is people want to hear directly from the people involved in these incidents that have been in all newspapers for many years. The losing bit is that no matter what way you look at it, it appears to sort of normalise criminal activity. And I mean, RT came under huge pressure with Jerry Hutch, even though Paul Reynolds, who interviewed him at the time, really went at him.
Yes.
In fact, about it. It didn't pull any punches or really tried to put everything to him in a way. It
made him very defensive, and I suppose we never got
so
that.
There was that was the other bit of it, because he was, I think, so conscious of not giving Jerry Hutch a chance to set his own narrative that, kind of made it a bit stop-start as a viewing experience. And I think the problem with John Gilligan, it does go back to the fact that because he's still he's active in criminality, he's subject of an international police investigation and is due to come to court sometime soon, that he can't look back and describe his former actions and what his motivations were, because they aren't in the past as such. I mean, also, obviously John Gilligan became the head of the biggest drugs gang in the country at the time, but he probably is most known because that gang ultimately murdered Veronica Guerin, crime reporter for the Sunday Indo. Now he in the Star and in the Mirror today, you have some very direct quotes where anybody who knows about Veronica Guerin's life or has even seen the film will know the incident where John Gilligan assaulted her, attacked her and beat her up. That's something that she spoke about, and that
she was going to press charges, I think, which is ultimately believed to be the motive for why he murdered her.
Though he denies that, I think, in this.
Well, she's denied everything.
He has, but, so Veronica Guerin is obviously not here to defend herself, for an obvious reason. And he does, in the Star, have a kind of a platform to say where he utterly denies that. He said he sort of pushed her mildly.
He says that actually shows the journalist questioning him, who I think is Jason O'Toole, how he handles that. And he sort of says, I just picked her up and put her back towards her car.
Yeah, I think that's a funny one just to be allowed stand, because you are effectively calling Veronica Guerin a liar. I mean, he says he didn't do what she said he did. He never would do that. And then he gives a sort of a nonsensical explanation where he says, if I had done it, the police would have charged me at that moment. Instead, they came back and charged me 5 or 6 months later. I mean, that anybody who's dealt with the police knows that just doesn't necessarily work that quickly. Any number of violence or violence against women cases take a long time to go through and get statements and get directions from the DPP. So he's allowed to sort of give this. Is it challenged? I mean, maybe it is challenged, but obviously.
Well, you see, it's not, and in a way, again, because of the style of programme it is, because it's wrapped constantly in these interviews with other contributors, who are all perfectly good contributors, don't get me wrong on that. And the style is perfectly good for a different type of a documentary. Yeah. But for this type of a documentary, in a way, I don't know. When John Gilligan says that he started out in robbery and bank robbery, and he went off in the boats and he never showed up to court, and when he had this interaction with Veronica Guerin, do we need other voices to tell us sort of to set the
scene, give a different context,
and to tell us the context of this, firstly the context of this attack, and we know about it. Yeah. So in a way, would it not have been sort of a more intimate portrait, a confession of John Gilligan, to have allowed him, speak about that, and for us to have come away with our own opinions on what he had to say? So I'm not saying exactly, because I can't remember exactly, do people go and say, that's not what happened, this is what happened. Yeah. But I certainly know around, certainly the early life, we've a lot of voices telling us why armed robbery isn't good, and why, the police were trying to fight against these things, and that people were traumatised during armed robberies. And I don't know, is that part of this documentary necessary? And it sort of is almost very distracting when you're watching it. It's kind of like, it's why I was able to sort of fast forward a little bit and sort of, turn away a little bit. I was certainly not transfixed on what Gilligan had to say. And I certainly wasn't. I would have been, maybe, if he had that sort of more intimate Louis Theroux style
and obviously
portrait.
If they'd done that, then they would have been subject to kind of criticism anyway. So there will
be criticism anyway.
There will.
There will be people. What did Jimmy Guerin have to say about this?
Yeah, because obviously he does. Again, he says John Gilligan speaks about the murder of Veronica Guerin. Once again, he denies any knowledge of it. Yeah. He places the murder directly on the shoulders of John Traynor and Charlie Bowden.
Yeah. Traynor being dead.
Traynor being dead and having betrayed John Gilligan, and they fell out during their lifetime. Charlie Bowden, again, having betrayed John Gilligan. Yeah. And he also speaks about Brian Mean's involvement again. They haven't spoken in years. They had a falling out. So he blames people that he'd have a reason to blame, if you know what I mean. And he says he denies that it was nothing to do with him. He didn't particularly care when he heard about it, because he knew he had nothing to do with it.
And he would never do a thing like that kind of thing. It's so insincere, and we've heard all this from him before, really. Yeah. We've heard rantings from him before. We've had blog postings from him before around all this, the same denials, the same narrative.
Well, and obviously Jimmy Guerin, who's Veronica's brother, is a local politician, former journalist, very well-known person of, great integrity around keeping his sister's memory alive. And he said he has, the allegations of an amoral individual, and he's talking about John Gilligan here, and a convicted criminal do not merit any rebuttal. So he's saying, I don't need to rebut these or give context to this. These issues have been covered in detail over 20 years ago in cases I attended. They were appropriately dealt with through the Irish judicial system, which the programme and the book are an insult to. I was invited to take part in the making of the documentary and declined. I further declined to attend a preview screening, as I strongly believe providing recognition for the series is entirely inappropriate. So he wants nothing to do with it. He spoke to our...
He's fed up, I'd say, is he?
But he's saying he's disappointed that it's being made at all. And
right.
He's not happy that it's being made. And it's not that the public needs to hear John Gilligan's excuses or explanations, that they don't offer anything, in his opinion. And I suppose from the family's perspective, what we're getting is, somebody issuing these denials and speaking.
And the family are obviously deeply, deeply personally traumatised.
Of course, and they may well feel that John Gilligan is using the murder of Veronica Guerin to throw shade at his own enemies.
Why is he doing it anyway? What is this about?
Well, I don't know.
I don't either, because
like John Gilligan, remember, he does actually speak in it about not wanting to be well known, and I think he says on another point that he didn't want to have a public profile. Whatever.
He said that. He said he didn't want to be kind of a celebrity type.
However, he's not been one of these guys who's avoided publicity at all costs. No. As I said, John Gilligan has spoken to the media many times, many different contexts, social media as well.
But I mean, even in his actions, he took a monumental battle against the state, against the Criminal Assets Bureau, against the seizure of his home, Jessbrook Equestrian Centre. I mean, he was certainly not a quiet kind of criminal ever. I mean, when he was operating, he was flash. He was bought the biggest indoor equestrian centre, or built rather the biggest indoor equestrian centre in the country.
Yeah.
And him and his wife Geraldine behaved like the lord and lady of the manor down at that equestrian centre. I mean, he couldn't have been more visible, more vocal. He was regularly taking limo trips to the races. Now, he was a gambler, and I think in this he does talk about how he gambles, and he talks about, certainly in the first episode, he talked about gambling, and I believe in the last episode he talks about how he spends his day gambling. So that bit is probably the only thing I think is probably genuine.
Yeah.
I know he certainly has, gambling has been something that has sort of followed him through his life. Look, I don't know. What is the point of this? What is he trying to do? Why does he keep telling us he'd nothing to do with this? Why does he keep telling us that he was wronged by the state, that we have to go into the minutiae of detail about how long it took people to take prosecutions against him, about how this bit was wrong, that bit was wrong. I mean, it is boring.
Yeah. I don't know. I suppose he may feel people like attention as well.
Well, again, I suppose we're coming out of it with that big question. It's like, again, the motive. What is the motive? And that's another reason maybe when you go about a project to kind of a deep dive as such into somebody who maybe is, not a regular member of society. You do a deep dive into some sort of an underworld figure, into somebody. You're trying to get an understanding out of it, or a reason that they are the way they are, or a reason why they're deciding to talk. None of those...
No, I mean, I think if you look
things are apparent from this.
Well, the great Phantom interview with Daniel Kinahan, for example, with an English podcaster, that clips appeared, but the full version never did. I think that was the reason that Daniel Kinahan did that, clearly was because he was in a place where he believed he could, rescue his reputation outside of Ireland through interviews and through stuff in the media, and that was his motivation. I think it's pretty clear. The motivation of other people sometimes, like say former IRA guys, as we talk, they want to explain how things happened, and I think that's totally valid and justified. It's not. I don't understand myself why John Gilligan feels the need for it. Maybe it's just, maybe people want to get their bit across. I don't know.
He's always wanted to do the big interview. Like, as you say, he did speak to Jason O'Toole before, way back in Hot Press.
Yeah.
He did kind of vast interviews.
Yeah,
he?
He did.
Did they not do a book before?
I don't think they did a book, no, but there was a series of long interviews. They obviously have a relationship over a period of time.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe he's facing a prison sentence, really, isn't he, in Spain? I mean, it's maybe, maybe this is he doesn't want that to be his final legacy if he goes into prison for a few years. I don't know. It's a funny one, I think, is it?
Is it a commercial?
Well,
Is it a commercial thing?
Well, TV
and obviously, and Virgin, not TV3.
Sorry,
it's like H. Williams. Remember those?
I do. No, Virgin Media have categorically said they did not pay John Gilligan for the interview.
But I mean, is it going down a rabbit hole here? Because I don't actually want to criticise anybody involved in this.
No.
I just certainly feel that there's just a lot of questions. I mean, is this because it's John Gilligan, and because John Gilligan will sell, because John Gilligan will draw the viewers, because you label it the confessions of a crime lord, and people will come to see what those confessions are. I just don't know whether it is what it says on the box. But again, I've only watched the first one with the distraction I had.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, something can be interesting and entertaining.
What are the big headlines out of it?
Well, I mean, the big
I
headlines.
heard that Veronica got killed.
Yeah.
Crime boss makes series of startling claims in new book. I'm going to hell and I'm not sorry. My gang shot her, but I didn't order it. I got 12 million from drugs. None of that is new.
Well, in fact, he's done lengthy interviews before denying he had any involvement in drugs and saying he was just an armed robber, as far as I know. According to my memory, he's done interviews denying any of that stuff.
No, he's talking about the drugs.
No, but previously.
Yeah, he has previously, yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Well, he always said he always said he did a bit of cannabis. In actual fact, that was always the mantra from the sort of the whole Gilligan family. The mantra was basically that, it was only cannabis. I mean, he never touched the cocaine or the heroin, so therefore he was perfectly entitled to do it. It wasn't harming anybody.
Yeah.
And obviously that's what his conviction is related to, cannabis. So he has said, basically talks about John Traynor again is the one who got him involved in drugs. He would never have got involved, he said, I think, if it wasn't for Traynor.
Yeah. He
had all the connections, he introduced him, he got him his first load in, he made such easy money that he went for it again and again. Again, I'm not sure that's a huge revelation from somebody like John Gilligan. I mean, all of that would have been fairly well put out. I suppose it's his voice, isn't that it? It's his voice saying that's, and on television, that's new.
Yeah, look, I think I would not say this is not a valid journalistic endeavour. I think it's one that's very hard to get, that it doesn't ring wrong when people watch it.
Yeah.
It can still be good television. It's still valid for him to sit there and say what he wants to say, and for that to be carried. I wouldn't criticise them for that. I suppose from the bits I've seen and the bits I've read, I suppose confessions of a crime boss would have been more interesting, where somebody lays out not just what they did, but why they did it. That would have been something that I would have wanted to see.
Yeah.
And look, it'll either...
And I don't think so far you get that. You do get the poverty thing. He talks about, giving up money at home and having to fight his father off his mother. And, it was obviously clearly, not a good place to grow up. But, I've spoken to plenty of people who'd maybe not be quite in their 70s, but on a bit, and they talk about, it stops becoming a thing you have to do.
Yeah.
And starts becoming a choice.
Yeah.
So there's none of that kind of revelation with Gilligan, or maybe self-awareness with him.
Self-awareness or self-reflectiveness, and it's sort of an admission of, like he does say, I'm I might go to hell or whatever. But really his language, even around Veronica Guerin, like, no matter what, a woman is dead, and it doesn't feel respectful, maybe, does it?
Yeah, but sure, he's not a respectful character. Like, he's not. You see, I am so biased anyway, because, as you know, I can't stand John Gilligan. I absolutely. He makes my lip curl. Since the very first time I saw him, and I was only a very young journalist sitting in the Special Criminal Court on Green Street, and he was in the dock. I think he was actually facing murder charges in relation to the murder of Veronica Guerin at the time. He was acquitted of that and obviously convicted on drug offences, but he used to scan the crowd of the journalists, and he would find, well, me and probably other young females that were there, and he would just rest his eyes on you, and he'd start kissing over and winking and all this sort of stuff. And at the time I was much softer. I hadn't been as damaged as I am nowadays, but I found it very disconcerting that I was sitting in a courtroom, that this was a guy in the dock.
On trial for murder.
On trial for murdering a female journalist. And here he was, like, in public, in full view of everybody, sort of sneering and trying to... And all the way along, whenever I've met him, he has been the same.
Yeah.
It's this very sneery kind of a relationship that we'd have. Now, I probably might be sneery back to him nowadays, because I don't find him scary at all.
Yeah.
I think he's a pathetic kind of an individual, still in the drug game, allegedly, and in his 70s trying to make a few bob. And, his son, Darren, who has had drug problems throughout his life, addiction issues, sort of by his side. I think even Geraldine and Tracy are no longer sort of there.
Yeah.
I have had interactions with them over the years, and, you'd almost feel a little bit sorry for the two of them and other members of the family, because he just is this toxic presence.
Interestingly, like, he does speak about regrets and how he's kind of wasted his time and, wasted some of his life in prison, obviously. And he speaks about, if he could cry, get it all. If he could, if he could get it all back, he would. But it's
the regret getting caught, though?
Well, it's a kind of it's a regret of his own losses, as opposed to regret for obviously the damage he may have done to others, or even the damage he may have done to his family or his people that cared for him, or any sort. There's many types of regrets. One of the least appealing is where you just regret what the consequences of your own actions on yourself. And that's, do you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah, it's not kind of, I have spoken to other criminals who seem really traumatized by some of the things that they did. I have spoken to people involved in the Troubles, for example, that committed terrible acts, and acts even now that they wouldn't say they were necessarily wrong, but they still speak about the consequences of what they did to them and to others. And John Gilligan kind of only speaks about the consequences to himself, maybe,
Yeah, and you think about him, and obviously the murder of Veronica Guerin by his gang, as he says himself. And he still, to this day, claims he didn't order it. Like, it was such a monumental thing to happen. It threw him and others right into the spotlight.
Yeah.
And, obviously they all went on the run. He was caught in the UK. He was extradited from Belmarsh back to Dublin. There was a famous photograph of him coming off the plane there, a bit like a Teletubby, the way he was dressed. His trial at the Special Criminal Court, he was a showman at that trial. He went into prison, and there was regularly videos released during his time in prison of him at parties, working out in prison. Not easy, really, to sneak a video and get it out of prison. But yes, he sort of managed that to be what came out. There was always stories about people he was falling in and falling out with. The day he left Portlaoise prison, and I was there that day, was an absolute theatre. It was choreographed by him. It was a theatre. He went up to a relative's house where he had a party. He came out and he spoke to journalists there and then. He was filmed. He laughed and joked and raised a pint to them. He then, after that, was shot. And I think he will discuss being shot in the next few episodes of The Virgin show. That again threw him back into the spotlight. He went to ground while he was recovering from those injuries. And then he came back to Ireland. And again, he agitated to get into the media because he said he was broke and he wanted to go on the housing list.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And he was all over, and he was in and out of the High Court. He was very visible going in, very visible coming out. He would often stop. He is a showman. He loves the publicity and he wants it his way. And in a way, he's got it and he hasn't, because, you know, even he surely would look at this with this bubble wrap around him of these other voices that are kind of overshadowing him nearly. You know what I mean?
And look, and in fairness, the Star and the Mirror, like they carry his words, which we would as well.
Yeah.
And we may well even do on Sunday. And then they put context around them.
Yeah.
So...
which works in the written word.
Which works, I think, better.
It's the visual, the documentary that it doesn't, for me, work in. And you'll have a look at it yourself. I'm sure it's on Sunday.
Sunday, yeah.
Night on Virgin. And I'm sure hundreds and thousands of people will tune in to look at it one way or another. It doesn't matter what I think about it. But I'd like to know, you know, after you see it, what you do think of that whole way it's put together, and, you know, whether it would have been better to just let him have his say and then let us judge it or whatever. Or whether he should have had his say at all, or whether what he has to say is valid enough or worthwhile enough to be on TV.
Maybe we should move into TV reviewing, should we?
I think we certainly could, because I'll tell you something else that's on that I am looking forward to seeing. I haven't seen a preview of it. It's on this week. Is it Monday night? Is it the K, the new series of the K?
Oh, inside the K, the guards,
that's back now. It's taken a long time to make this episode, this series.
Which I thought was really good, actually.
It was so well made.
Yeah, it was.
And look, there you go, where you have a bit of television which really gives you an insight into something that you don't actually know about. And it was the way those guards were being treated in the course of their job, what the sort of situations they had to go into. I mean, we hear about it, you know what I mean? You'll hear a report on the news, but to actually go in there with them as a fly on the wall, and you can nearly feel the fear and that sense of, you know, the aggression they're facing all the time.
Yeah.
But I will be watching that.
Yeah, I think there is some very dramatic CCTV footage of some of the Gucci gang violence,
right,
and some of the Kulak feuds and some of the shootings. So, yeah, look, I mean, it's. I suppose some of these programs, they're very disposable and they get forgotten about, and some of them won't. And you know.
Do you know what we'll have to do now next week? Because I'm back with a bang next week, and I really have to just get my mojo back. I'm feeling a bit tired. Are you?
Well, no, I feel a bit tired. Yeah, I feel it's
even in your magic green jumper.
My magic green jumper. I'm wearing a green jumper for our listeners again, Nicola.
Yeah, you're very, very good about
patriotic
me about them.
Yeah.
But no, we need to. We've a lot to discuss in the next week, and the courts are back. There's some interesting stuff coming up. Yeah,
it's always a hard time for crime journalism during the summer.
Yeah,
without the courts.
We've managed to waffle our way through it.
We have managed to waffle our way through it.
Yeah. Have you missed me terribly?
Look, I've been crying and bawling. And
here I am on a day off talking to you.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah. But, it's not the same having people not having commenting on my physical appearance.
Why don't you do the intro, eh?
No.
Go on.
No.
Jeez. No. Right, well, look, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Nicola.